Hey guys, my name is Nikki Kidd and I chose Gopher Tortoise commensal relationships to cover because they are one of my favorite native species and their burrows help sustain a lot of other native species in the state. This is my first time to record a PowerPoint live, so I'm kind of praying to the technology gods on this one. Here's a little overview of the topics I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk about, who the gopher tortoise is, what is their habitat, what commensalism is and which species have commensal relationships with them, what a keystone species is and how a gopher tortoise is one, and then the conservation efforts for this species. So the gopher tortoise, there are actually only 5 tortoise species in North America. So they are one of 5 and they're the only one found east of the Mississippi River. They're about 9 to 11 inches fully grown. They get up to 15 inches. These first 3 bullet points, ecosystem engineer, keystone species, and the commensal relationships, I'm going to talk to in depth on following slides, but I just wanted to touch some key points of topics we've been covering in class. So they are a K strategist, which because they have long lives, they live up to 60 years old in the wild. They can live 90 plus years in captivity. They have slow development. Their maturation age, sexual maturity for males is between 9 and 12 years old, and for females it's 10 to 21 years old, so it takes a while to get there. They're small egg strategists. They lay about 5 to 9 eggs once a year. They look like ping pong balls. I'll show a picture in a few slides. And there's no maternal care whatsoever. They are polygynous, so males have several mates each breeding season, which happens once a year. That makes them Iteroparous, since they reproduce more than once in their lifetime. They have precocial young, so they're self-sufficient as hatchlings. They're able to forage for themselves right off the bat. And they are herbivores, foraging in close proximity to their burrows. Their habitat, this picture is a pretty good example. It's usually where I see them as something like that. The primary one is the longleaf pine sandhills, which are in the southeastern coastal plains. It's an endangered habitat due to the loss of the longleaf pines, and it is one of the most biodiverse ecosystems in North America, considered a biodiversity hotspot. So they need well-drained soil for their burrows, and they need an open canopy to allow light penetration to the ground for them. Here's a range map to show you where they are found. So all of Florida, they're found in each of the counties. Now their burrows are a big part of why they're commensal. They have all these commensal relationships, why they're a keystone species. So I want to talk quite a bit about the burrows. They're this half moon shape because of the shape of their shell. They spend most of their life in burrows, over 90% of it. They are actually pretty social, so they'll visit each other's burrows. And they, like I said, they forage near their burrow. They eat herbaceous plants nearby. And they dig more than one in their lifetime. So as they get bigger, or as they need to move to another habitat to support them, they'll dig another. And females average 5 burrows per year, and males average 10 per year. And they're pretty deep in the ground, so the longest recorded one was 20.4 meters long, but they average closer to 4.6 meters long and 2 meters deep. So that was a lot longer than I initially thought when I started learning about gopher tortoises. It's pretty cool. Now they lay their eggs in, it's called the apron of the burrow. It's this sandy strip leading up to the burrow. And they lay them deep in that, well, not too deep, but in the apron. So you never want to walk up to a burrow to check it out and stomp on the apron, because you could be hurting some eggs under there. So yes, they are oviparous. They have temperature dependent sex determination, and they lay those eggs in late spring to early summer. It takes 80 to 110 days for incubation, and these are the hatchlings and those ping pong eggs I was talking about. So they're these yellow, orange color when they're hatchlings, and then they darken up with age. So this is a video by David Attenborough from
The Gopher Tortoise is heading for home. And with luck, I'll be able to follow it, the tortoise, as it goes down into its burrow. And that camera has also got a thermometer mounted on it. Already, I can see the temperature is beginning to drop. The further down the burrow we go, the cooler it gets. Now, where's the tortoise? There it is. I'm right behind. We're now a couple of meters in, but the burrow could go on for some 50 feet, 17 meters. And it's all been built by this tortoise.
Super cool. I love seeing the inside of their burrows, their little secret world. So this is what makes them ecosystem engineers. They construct these burrows, it alters the landscape, and it creates these stable microclimates for all kinds of species to inhabit. It also recycles buried nutrients under the ground to the surface, so pioneer plant species could establish. So they are a keystone species. That definition we had in class, a species which has a disproportionately large effect relative to their abundance or biomass on biodiversity and other ecosystem functions. So this makes them a really important species to the ecosystem. If we lost them, it would be detrimental. A lot of other species would go endangered or extinct because of it unless they adapt really quickly. So it makes them a priority for conservation efforts, which has a lot of limited time and funds if we have to focus somewhere. For this ecosystem, the gopher tortoise is a really important one to focus on. And this diagram kind of just shows a few examples of species that inhabit the burrows, which I'll talk a lot more about coming up. And I wanted to cover the definition for commensalism. So it's when one species benefits from another species without harming or benefiting the other species. So there's lots of species that benefit from the gopher tortoise, but the gopher tortoise doesn't really benefit or get harmed in any way from these species benefiting. And so it's largely because of their burrows that these species get to benefit from the gopher tortoise. There are 362 documented species that have commensal relationships. Most of them are invertebrates. There's 60 vertebrates. Several of the species that use these burrows are imperiled species. A lot of my favorite natives that are struggling, like the Florida pine snake, the eastern indigo snake, gopher frogs, 9-banded armadillos, Florida mice. There's a lot. And they use these burrows for shelter. It can be from fires, from extreme weather. Maybe it's too cold or too hot that day. They can feed in there. There are a lot of invertebrates that feed on the tortoise species. And then you get frogs down there trying to eat on those invertebrates, and then you get, snakes trying to eat the frogs, and it's just this food web that exists in the burrows. There's also mating that takes place. There's a lot of nesting inside the burrows, and this can be in occupied or abandoned burrows. Like I said, they build lots of burrows in their life, so there's a lot of abandoned ones, but they are usually occupied more in burrows where a tortoise is active. Also, the burrows, within 5 years, they will fully collapse. So you need the tortoises there building new burrows for these species that depend on them. So I had a pretty hard time finding a complete list of all the species that have commensal relationships, and I just wanted to put this here for anyone interested. This first slide is all of the vertebrates. And then we have all of the invertebrates. And I think visualizing it like that really helps it sink in how important this species is, how many others depend on it. So these are a couple pictures I took of species occupying burrows. The left one is a southern toad. He was just right at the mouth of the burrow. He was there all day. Every time I walked by, he was still there. On the right, that's a gopher frog, and he was deep in the burrow. That was one day. I was with my internship and we were using camera scopes, kind of like David Attenborough, but a little different. I'll show in a different picture later on. But he was deep in there, pretty close to the tortoise actually. So here are some diamondback rattlesnakes in a burrow. And I wanted to talk about a few of my favorite species that depend on the gopher tortoise burrows. The first of which is the eastern indigo snake. It is federally designated threatened. It is protected in Florida. It uses the burrows as shelter for mating. They also nest in there. They'll lay their eggs in the burrows, usually the abandoned ones. And here's a poster at a park, showing that they are protected and not to harm them. They're really beautiful snakes. And then here's a Florida mouse in a burrow. It is IUCN declared vulnerable. It is protected, and they nest in the burrows. They are obligatory to these burrows. They depend on them for survival in the city habitats. They need them. And the gopher frog is another species that absolutely needs the burrows. This is where they live. They depend on them for survival. They need it to prevent desiccation in these hot climates. They can't dry up, and they are declared near threatened by the IUCN, and they are protected. Now, the conservation status of a gopher tortoise, it is declared IUCN vulnerable, it is declared in Florida threatened, and it is protected. It's declined in population over 80% in the last 100 years, and this is due to habitat loss, people building houses and malls and everything, illegal harvesting, like for the pet trade or for food. People did used to eat them pretty often, and it still happens sometimes. Disease and fire suppression, which I'll talk in a minute about how important fires are for their survival. So it is illegal to handle or relocate these tortoises. The only exception is if you're trying to help them cross a busy road. You want to help them just right across it, same direction they were headed, and set them down facing that direction. Otherwise, you can throw off their bearings. They won't know where they are, and they can die trying to find home. You can't place them in your car to relocate them. That constitutes illegal possession. So you just want to help them right out of harm's way in the direction they were facing. So these prescribed burns, these, gopher tortoises evolved in a habitat that had natural fires regularly. And this helps prevent a closed canopy. It keeps them more open so sunlight can get down. And when we don't have these, the canopy closes up. They're not getting enough sunlight. They'll abandon their burrows and go find somewhere else to live. So these prescribed burns are very important. They aren't happening as much as they should, but they're starting to pick back up now that we know how important they are. People have tried alternatives instead of burning with heavy equipment coming in to cut the trees. But what we found is that using these heavy machinery, if you're within 3 meters of a burrow, just being within that proximity, you can collapse a burrow, and this will cause tortoise injuries or death, traps them inside. It can also trap inside any commensals that are in there that are also protected and struggling. So the fires are really what we need to be doing, and there have been a lot of studies that areas that have had recent prescribed burns do have greater species diversity. So some conservation efforts in place. That protected status really helps, because when you put a legal standing behind something, people are a little more hesitant to break it. They don't want to get charged or have something on their record. So that helps a lot. Education. This is mostly for children, a lot of it that I see. It's through conservation groups and parks where they have little classes and show the kids the tortoises, get them excited about wildlife. You also see these signs, near roads that have tortoises nearby, so to slow down and watch for them, or at a park where they know there's a lot on property. Where, I think education is really the most important piece of conservation. The more people know, the more they can help. There's also those prescribed burns we talked about to help their habitats stay with an open canopy. Gopher Tortoise Day, which is April 10th, to help raise awareness, and then relocation permits. So when you're building on a site and there are gopher tortoises on property, you have to have a permit to relocate them, and you can only relocate if you're a certified tortoise agent. So my internship teaches these classes to certify. Here on the right is Neil talking to a group about what we're going to be doing that day, and that day we were doing transects and quadrants to help determine how many burrows were in that area, and then also look at, are they abandoned, are they potentially occupied, and these were all people getting certified for relocating gopher tortoises for usually like building companies, is usually what they worked for. Some people were working independently. And we also use these camera scopes that I was talking about. That's how I got that gopher frog picture. So you use the scope to determine, is there a gopher tortoise in here, or does it look abandoned? And then once you know a gopher tortoise is in there, you can set a trap outside of it, either a cage or a bucket trap. You dig a hole and you put a bucket in it. You kind of disguise it so they don't see it when they're coming up, and then they fall in. And you check these every day. And then the tortoises, once captured, get relocated to a recipient site, which is they get certified to be a recipient site. They get checked regularly to make sure their habitat is good. They can't have more than a certain number of tortoises per acre. And I know that we're kind of running out of recipient sites in Florida. They're getting pretty full. Oh, and if you can't get them by trapping, you have to dig by hand to get the tortoise out. So that way you're not risking it collapsing on the tortoise, the burrow. Okay, so that's everything I have. I look forward to any questions anyone has, and I'm excited to see everyone else's presentations. This one was really exciting for me. They're one of my favorite species, so I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Thank you.